All right, it's 9:01 and we've got a fair amount of people that have joined already. And as I said, this will be recorded. So I'm going to jump right in. We're going to do this from the perspective of there's several people on this webinar that are new to MyWorkDrive. So we're going to incorporate what's new in 6.4 into this demo, and then we'll highlight for current customers what actually we showed that was different. So everybody will be caught up. So let's go. All right, I already introduced myself. In the middle here, Dan Gordon is on the call. He'll be doing a portion of the demo. Our CEO and co-founder, and Scott Miller is our VP of Engineering. About MyWorkDrive, secure file remote access from any OS stored on any platform without vendor lock-in. Pretty proud of our customers we have. We have enterprises, governments, higher education, healthcare. As you can see, we have some pretty significant names and influencers as well. For today, what is MyWorkDrive? We'll briefly tell you that. Client-side demo, which I will be doing. Server-side demo will be Scott. And Dan will be also helping on some of the slides as well that get into the more technical nature. And as we mentioned at the end, we'll do the Q&A. What is MyWorkDrive? Secure file share remote access. So we're adding a cloud sharing experience capabilities without VPN, syncing or migrating data. Very, very important. I had a bunch of calls this week asking about, well, so who's holding my data? It's not MyWorkDrive. That's kind of our claim to fame. We'll see your data when you add us to the domain, but it's your data and it's your underlying NTFS permissions and everything, and we just see what you want us to see. Better security and control using existing infrastructure without VPN. No vendor lock-in. Again, we don't have your files. There's no migrating back if you ever need to because it's your data. Secure file share remote access. 3 clients, as I mentioned. We have the web browser. No plugins necessary, just in all cases, our clients use the same URL to the MyWorkDrive server, whether it's the web browser, the map drive, and the mobile, and we'll show all of that. There you go, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Rick. I'll just describe MyWorkDrive from a network perspective and where it sits. So on the right, you would have your servers, your existing storage, Windows shares, SMB. We do have some customers using SMB. Open source, NAS appliances, and new to 6.4, we're also supporting storage that lives on OneDrive and SharePoint. In the middle, you'll see MyWorkDrive. It's basically a gateway to be able to get to that storage. So there's nothing stored on the MyWorkDrive server at all. It's literally a file storage gateway appliance with security layered on top of that then services the clients on the left, where we have the desktop drives for Mac and PC, the mobile clients for Android and iOS, and then the web browser. Some customers only use the web browser from a security perspective. They like to do that and lock things down. They don't have to support any clients at all. We also are unique in that we allow you to use Office, be able to edit documents in Office 365 from a client side with not having them being saved back to the cloud, but right to your own storage. And just to kind of review that a little bit, what is the Microsoft Online Editing? As I mentioned, no files are needing to be migrated to like OneDrive, SharePoint, Dropbox, Box, or anything like that. What happens is the integration that you enable allows that file to be placed in those editors. That we have multiple methods of being able to do that. We support co-editing of Office files, which in 6.4 we now even support through the map drive client. The users edit through the browser, the map drive client, or the mobile client, and we can edit in OneDrive, SharePoint, using Office Online or Office Online servers on-premise. So we have multiple ways for customers to be able to edit documents, whether they use the cloud or on-prem completely offline if that's what they desire. some of the compliance security features that we built into MyWorkDrive. That's a lot of what we're bringing to the table, besides the fact that we don't have to migrate any files and there's no syncing and there's no documents and files left behind on the user device. We also allow you to layer on a lot of security features that you would never be able to do with VPN. So, of course, we support two-factor authentication, multiple SAML providers, Duo, AzureAD, Okta, all of those are supported. They also have some of their own additional security layering on top of that. That, of course, is automatically supported. We support file type blocking and alerting to keep malware away. We also have device approval that was added in the last couple of versions. So you can say, oh, I'm going to support MapDrive client, but I'm only going to support it for pre-approved devices, and then everyone else would have to use the web. We support pre-auth for identity providers. For those familiar with AzureAD, you can make AzureAD your SAML provider and then enable pre-authentication so that user, before they even get through AzureAD, they have to be pre-authenticated before they can even get to the MyWorkDrive URL, which is secured as a reverse proxy behind some of the AzureAD stuff. We support data leak prevention. That allows users to be able to see files but not be able to download them and puts watermarks across them. That also is available in the MapDrive client, and that's a very unique feature to be able to present those. There's no user training involved. They just simply see what they're allowed to see. And we also have external guest user sharing and collaboration that allows customers of ours to be able to invite people in AzureAD to their AzureAD tenant or a special one that they set up to be able to completely collaborate side by side with internal users. And of course, with 6.4, we'll go over your standard link type sharing with public sharing as well. And now I'm going to stop sharing and I'll turn it over to Rick and he'll go through the client demo and then we'll switch over to Scott.
Okay, can everyone see my desktop? Very good. Okay, this is, I'm going to approach this from the client perspective. Scott will do that from the admin perspective in a bit. And so let's just go. I mentioned earlier we have three clients. One is the web client. The other one is the MapDrive, and then we have mobile. We'll touch all of those. So if you're looking right here, MyWorkDrive, this is the URL of the MyWorkDrive server. Okay, here I go. This is my experience. Keep in mind, I do not have single sign-on turned on. If I did, you would flow right through. So a lot of people ask that. I just do not have it turned on because this is my demo machine. And I'm going to log in, and these are my NT credentials. Keep in mind, everything you're going to see is based on NT credentials and underlying NTFS permissions. So this is I call it an informational window. Some people call it pester. This is letting people know that certain downloads are not allowed on file shares, having to do with our data leak prevention. And I'll talk more about that. I like to leave it here for demos, but you don't need to show that. That's something you can turn off. And so just on the left here, Dan mentioned, user training. You really don't need user training, right? Because this is like pretty much File Explorer. The MapDrive is true MapDrive. It's all very, very straightforward. So these are the shares that I can see as Rick, the user ID. Now, everybody on the call may see something different, again, based on their underlying NTFS permissions on what they can see. So this is what I have. And I'm going to talk about here. This is OneDrive. This is 6.4. So our current customers who have asked for that are going to say, "Wow, that's really cool. We have that." So that's OneDrive. This is actually my OneDrive. Here's SharePoint. So we are now able to show OneDrive and SharePoint shares within my WorkDrive. If I just open that up, there's going to be something in there. There you go. So now I'm going to go to well, let's discuss this too. Dan mentioned we have guest sharing, and that's leveraging Microsoft's B2B sharing, which literally lets you add users that are not on the domain to participate in shares with all of the restrictions that you want to be put on there. So it's very, very tightly wound together for collaboration, things like that. And then home drives. You can choose to show users home drives or not as well. And I think that's going to cover most of that. So I'm just going to go here to my share that I always need to go. And Dan had mentioned interface with Office 365. So out of the box, just if you have an Office 365 account, you're going to go right to that document in Office 365. It will open up, and if you choose to edit, you can edit the document. Now, if everyone on the call here, they get messy with all these users, but we could collaborate on the document ourselves. So it's truly Office 365 and everything you would expect. Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all of that. Interestingly enough, I could say I don't have Office 365, so I want to edit it in the local app. So I could actually use the web browser and edit in the local app. Now I'm going to go to another area. Oh, this here is it's dynamic. It's going to be based on the permissions that the user has. So if somebody has a read-only permission to a share, then they're not going to have, edit and, download and things like that. I'm going to real quickly, before I do anything, what is DLP? How does it work? Easiest way to do it is just go in to any file. So here's a PDF. Now, if this was a Word document, like you just saw me go into, it would display it like this, but you wouldn't be able to go to Office 365, again, unless the admin sets it up that way. So you can, I call it, you can look, but don't touch documents. Here you can see we date and time stamped. This is a customizable message of, whatever you want to say internally, but at its highest level, that's what data leak prevention is. That is why we are FedRAMP, FINRA, GDPR, all of these different, we're compliant with everything pretty much out of the box because of the way we can protect documents from leaving where they live and not letting them get out in the wild. Now, to finish up on this client, I'm going to go, let's see, yes, let's go with, okay, 6.4. What's new? Here's this. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say share. I can share it internally. I can share it publicly. Let's go here because let's do this one. Share there. So do this. Dan mentioned that we have now two types of sharing. One is B2B. The other one is this, which is more of a lightweight, but it's very, very nice because we've had this request for probably a couple of years that, okay, 10 views is all we're going to allow. We're going to expire this after 3 days. We can throw a password on that. We can create the shared link. Boom, I got that. I can now put it in an email and send it out, and people can access those files and see them. And we can do that. You saw me do it on a file level, but I can also do it on a folder level as well. So it would open up a folder for those folks. Same thing. So it would do that. So I think, unless you guys can make me honest, I think I pretty well covered the web client. So I'm going to put this away for now. And okay, File Explorer. Again, I'm treating this as if it is a client machine. So I call this pre-MyWorkDrive. I have a C drive, an E drive, and a Z drive, probably similar to what most people's machines are. And I'm showing this on Windows, but we also have a client for Mac as well. So let's go here. And this is our client for the Windows environment. Notice, as I mentioned earlier, the same URL, the same credentials. This could be a silent install that if you have control over the machine, this is going to be put on. You can actually send it to someone's machine when they're on the network, and it would just be available to them. I do not have it starting at startup because I wanted to hold it so I could show you. But if I did map at startup, when I turn my machine on, it just happens. And here we go. Now, Doesn't look like much is happening. Those two flashes are because I'm using OneDrive and SharePoint integration, and it's logging me into that. So let's go back. Here we go. I've got CE, all of these. The user experience is pretty nice. I mean, the user doesn't know or care where these are coming from, but they're drives, and you can see that we've assigned certain drive letters to them. So we can certainly let the remote user enjoy the same experience as if they were in the office. So I'm just going to go here to my favorite share, which is my demo. And if I open this one, which you saw me open a minute ago, in Office 365, same document, same everything. I can edit, I can do everything. One thing I want to mention is if I still had that open in Office 365 or opened here as by another user, it's going to give me that standard Windows file locking message. This file is in use by somebody else. And yeah, your standard messaging and your standard reaction to it is what you would do. Now, the other very nice thing about this is what if you, in some cases, do not have local Office on your machine, but you want to be able to edit it, and you do have Office 365. At client install time, you can tell the client that open this up in Office 365 because they don't have local Office. So that's one of the, I call it enhancements we have. The other one on the map drive is the ability for the admin to restrict using our block list or allow using our allow list. Things of allow PDFs, JPEGs, Word type documents, and nothing else. Or block only PSTs, EXEs, something like that. So, or in my case, I have it wide open, but I'm sure you get the idea. And that's it. That's how the map drive works. And I think I didn't show this, but it's going to be the same. MyWorkDrive. It's up here. Let's do that. Let's do a share. There it is. Same thing. Same interface, same everything. So you can do that public sharing from MyWorkDrive in the MapDrive client as well. One thing that we do very well that is not out there, but most other vendors, is I can show DLP shares through the MapDrive, where, again, look but don't touch. So if I were to open up this and it was a Word document, it would open up in that viewer you saw earlier. So we're able to show those look but do not touch or share documents using our DLP. All right. That should cover the map drive, I believe, from most perspectives. Now I'm going to do mobile, and I'm doing this real quick in here because you don't want me to have to get air server or everything running during this demo. So this is pretty much going to tell you everything you need to see. Again, iOS, Android, we cover both sides of the house. And I better do a page down. It's going to let me do it. All right. Let's go here. And a window out of the way, and I'm just going to click through this way. Okay, there it is. So you put your credentials in, or you can save them and store them. We respect SAML, mobile SAML, ADFS logins. You can choose your view. Here we have a thumbnail or list view there, and now I can just tap on the file, and it opens it up in read-only mode. Maybe that's all I need to do. Maybe I want to email that out, and if I have permissions, I can do that. My email client will open up, and I can do that as an attachment. The other thing is maybe I do need to I call it light editing. I don't want to write War and Peace on something, but I could open this up in Microsoft Word and do some light editing. Market definition, there it is. So maybe, you know, it's unlikely these days, but you can download a file in the event you know you're not going to have connectivity. I always say Southwest Airlines, which is so iffy, you might want to do that. And then you can edit it and send it up again later. Now, and then you can say, where do you want to store that for later use? One thing that's, I'm not sure if it's new in 6.4, but I never talked about it much, is the ability, and it's funny, over the last 2 days, 2 customers, very mobile centric, wanted to do bulk uploading of photographs that are on their iPad. And we now support that, which is, that's been asked for as well. Very nice client. I actually, to be honest, hadn't played with it a lot, but the 2 customers, prospects, I should say, that are interested in that, I was just telling our development team that it's a pretty cool application. So that's mobile. I'm probably done with what I'm doing, Dan, and I'll head this back.
Thanks, Rick. And of course, anyone can schedule a demo with you if you want to do a deeper dive on any of the client stuff. There's things we didn't cover in the mobile that are, such as, being able to open files and dump them using the iOS file provider and some of the other more advanced functions that we've got in there. And we'll turn it over to Scott to do the server demo.
I'll mention that file uploading on the mobile, the file and the photo and video uploading has been around for a little while, but it is significantly improved in 6.4. So Rick, you probably noticed some of the improvements, particularly around the ability to choose sizes of files. So if you're uploading a lot of files, you can actually do file size. You can actually limit those. So, cameras nowadays take 26 megapixel photos. You don't need a 40 megabyte photo of a receipt that you're uploading to your expense file. You could do that in a smaller size. The other thing that got added in 6.4, which isn't easy to show in the slider there, is the ability to page through photos. So there's now a photo viewer. I know that's been a feature request that people have asked for a long time. But let me get into the server stuff because you guys are going to want to. Clicked on the wrong link there. This will be the meat of it. Now, I don't want to overwhelm you with, for whatever reason, I can't quite get this thing to share. So now you ought to have my screen. I don't want to overwhelm you with all the features that are in the MyWorkDrive software, kind of like what Dan just said about scheduling a personal demo. If you have questions about any of this stuff or want to talk about your use case, just reach out to Rick. There's a demo scheduling tool on the website. Or email us and support. We're happy to answer questions about specific functionality. I want to hit the important parts, the highlights, and just some of the new features that are in there. Let me start and tell you how to get where you've just been with Rick, which is MyWorkDrive installs on a domain joined Windows server. So 2016, 2019, 2022 doesn't matter. I wouldn't recommend 2008 or 2012 even being end of life with Microsoft and not having all the prerequisites that are easy to install. But saying that, MyWorkDrive does install prerequisites, so don't feel like you need to hand install IIS or hand install some particular version of .NET or anything of that nature. The MyWorkDrive installer will take care of all the prerequisites, C#, IIS, .NET, all those kind of things. But domain joined Windows Server can be physical, can be virtual, can be on-prem, can be in the cloud. MyWorkDrive doesn't care. All MyWorkDrive cares about is being domain joined, and then you're going to want a relatively local connection to the resources that we're going to use, Active Directory and your file shares. Once you install MyWorkDrive, installing it is easy as downloading it from our website, running the installer. Again, you don't need to do any real prep other than domain join Windows Server. You're going to get walked through the setup process. It's going to prompt you for a license key or the ability to create one if you're creating a trial. Don't feel like you need to do something special to get a trial key ahead of time. It's all done as part of the install process. Once that installer finishes, you will get on the MyWorkDrive server desktop the MyWorkDrive control panel with a link to open up the admin panel. Now, this is new in 6.4. People who've been around for a while will remember it's always just been a hyperlink, which always opened in a browser, which required you to install a browser since Internet Explorer doesn't really work with JavaScript very well anymore. That's no longer required. You can open it with the built-in Edge WebView 2. This uses that new Edge browser that Microsoft has moved over to, the Chromium-based Edge. And of course, you get the login screen, which there is no special login user for this. There is no default admin like you're used to with so many applications. Like all of the tools that we use in MyWorkDrive, this does a real-time lookup on Active Directory to grant you access. And in this case, you want to be someone who's a domain administrator or a local system administrator. I always say whatever account you've logged into the server with, because inevitably you're using a remote desktop to get to the machine and signing in, that user will have permission to sign into MyWorkDrive. I've signed in. Now, the very first time, this is an existing server. This is actually the same server Rick was using, so some of these resources will look familiar to you from the last few minutes of the demo. But the very first time you sign in with a new install, you'll get the wizard. We've revised the wizard in 6.4, so this may look new or different to some of you who are familiar with it. You really only need to ever go through the wizard once, just the very first time. What it does is it gets you all those basics you need to have a published server out there for your users to be able to sign into. First thing it's going to prompt you for is basically publishing it, in air quotes, to the internet. Now, I always add the caveat here that it doesn't have to be the internet. As Dan mentioned, you can put this into private clouds. You can put this behind a conditional access with compliant devices. You can publish it on internal DNS. You can put it behind Zscalers and other tools. So it doesn't have to be a public server. But if you want it to be public, we make it really easy using our Cloud Web Connector. This is a built-in reverse proxy using the Cloudflare. And all these little icons you see, the little eyes that you see are tooltips that will open up windows that'll explain to you quite what we're doing and why we're doing it and how you want to do it. In this case, I already have the server running, so I'm just going to pick manual connection. If you took the Cloud Web Connector, you'd drop in your email so we know who to send a notification to, and you'd pick your site name, probably your company name or something akin to that, project name, and you'd get in. This email is just telling you when it's available. It's not authenticating you in any way or anything of that nature. The next step, it's going to prompt me if I want to enable a series of integration tools. We talked about Office Online Editing. The default is OneDrive. There's an option to use SharePoint Service Mode. All of these things, I should say, you can change using all of these other menu items over here on the left. So if you don't know what you want the answer to be, feel free to turn it off or leave it on. If you want to get that default functionality, you can always change it later. I have these things turned on. Now it's going to prompt us to add that share. You saw Rick's been using that demo share. This is just the share that's on your existing Active Directory. Oops, I should be able to spell there. Now, this could also be a local disk, as you saw in the examples. I'll show you again in a minute. The shares could be a local drive on E, but by and large, this is going to be a UNC path. And if it's a OneDrive or SharePoint, it actually prompts separately. For OneDrive, there is no prompting. It just uses the user's default OneDrive. SharePoint gives you the option to publish a specific subfolder or collection. I'll show you that here in a minute. By default, we're going to import your information from Active Directory, so there's no hand provisioning of users. As Rick and Dan both mentioned, we leverage your existing resources, both the ACLs that are on your file shares and the user accounts. So nothing to set there. I'm going to skip this because I already have the shares set up on the server and I don't want to make any changes to it. And we've got a couple final options here. That home folder coming from Active Directory from the user's profile. If you're not using those, if you've moved over to just using OneDrive for user home folders, you can simply turn that off. A couple small security things around file size limits if you wish to enable those, and you're done. You get next, you get finish. Everybody's happy. Now, again, you've got all the ability to control all these things with this menu on the left. The idea behind MyWorkDrive is to avoid duplicate administration. So we don't want you to have to sign into MyWorkDrive every day or 10 times a day to make adjustments to shares or to permissions or anything of that nature. You set up MyWorkDrive. We'll look at Rick's demo share because we've been talking about this folder today. You notice, again, he's got a local disk on E. You can certainly do that, but it's more common to be an SMB path. It's just happens to be everything on one machine for ease of use, so there aren't any SMB mount points. But we've imported, this is what came in from import, and you've got all these extra security features on here that get set. Now, again, I didn't do this as part of the wizard, so I have some customization in here already, but the ability to turn off and on and off download, that's the DLP functionality. You could radio it off for everyone, or you can set it for select groups. Notice I've got domain users and domain administrators on here. This is what came in from our NTFS permissions. For domain admins, I've eliminated download and online edit public sharing. I've just put them in a secure mode. So if someone who's a domain admin accidentally logs into the MyWorkDrive server to the public web client with their domain credentials, then they'll get restrictions to protect the data essentially. Another point I was going to make earlier, and Rick or Dan, if one of you would check on the...
I got that. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Got a little ping in my ear there. Public sharing is something that you control as the administrator. So Rick showed you that both in the web client and in the MapDrive client. Don't feel like that's on publicly for everyone and all of a sudden you've got this data hole for everything you publish in MyWorkDrive. You have the ability to control whether it's on for a particular share and whether it's on by user and group within that share. So as you see here, I've taken it away from domain admins. You also have some more security features around the limits and the password requiring and the folder structure and stuff that I'll show you here in a minute. So that's controls you have here with the ability to make edits and import. We also, as I've said, mentioned we also support, as has been mentioned, OneDrive and SharePoint. There are no settings for OneDrive. It's essentially just, do you want a drive letter? What permissions and functionality should they have as far as access? And then it gets a little more fancy with SharePoint because when you add SharePoint, you have the ability to control Are you using a default site, which is just your default site on SharePoint when the user signs in? Or are you defining a particular one of your sites? And then, as I mentioned, libraries and subfolders. And like we talked about, there's tooltips along in here to give you guidance on what you want to set up. Now, these permissions, when you get into OneDrive and SharePoint, change a little bit. We're no longer importing NTFS ACLs because there aren't NTFS ACLs on OneDrive and SharePoint. We're defining against your Active Directory groups who should even see that share. So you still have that granular level of control to say, and in this case, Rick's very simplified demonstration environment, we've said anyone who has domain users can see the SharePoint share that we've published. Their actual permissions within that SharePoint share are going to depend on their permissions on SharePoint. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like this becomes your sharing an SMB of that Windows share, where you just grant everyone full control, and then you use NTFS to do granular level permissions and actual folder and file level permissions. Well, this is akin to that. So again, don't get hung up on that. I know that can be kind of a confusing topic. The idea being you have maximum control over this. So at the administrator level, you don't have to feel like you're granting access or keys to the kingdom to everyone as you go in there. Some of the functionality in here, the ability to see file locks, sessions, things like that, relatively unchanged from prior versions. Settings, again, there's lots of stuff in here and it can be really complicated, and I'm not going to talk about everything. So if you need to talk about a specific scenario that you have, reach out to us and we'll be happy to walk you through it. I want to hit the highlights though. You'll notice at the top of this list, these first four, Cloud Web Connector, Office Online Editing, OneDrive, SharePoint, these all come from that wizard. So remember I said, if you don't know what you want in the wizard, leave on the default or turn it off, whichever your preference is, but you can make changes here. And you'll notice that I don't have the Cloud Web Connector on, but you can turn it on. And then the key functionality, a big difference in 6.4, and existing users will recognize slight differences here, is instead of that long list of settings for each of these features being in here, we've created a new feature in MyWorkDrive called integrations, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But you get the ability to edit that with a pop-up here, or with an overlay. So just be aware that that changed a little bit. Functionality all works exactly the same as far as enabling functionality, turning things on and off. I mentioned there are options for your editing, and you saw in Dan's window the different options when he was talking about our online editing to set and choose different things. You would do that here if you want to use OneDrive versus, say, SharePoint service mode, which isn't set up on this server, but you would need to set it up. And of course, you click these links, and they're either those links or the little superstitials, and we have help for getting all those things set up. I don't want to make any changes to this though, so let me put it back on OneDrive. Now, going on down the list, there's lots of other functionality in here and controls for security. Like I mentioned, you retain ultimate control, the ability to set what happens when you click on documents, or what username format do I want, or do I want particular clients enabled? Because beyond just simply turning them on and off in that granular permission on shares, you can wholesale say, we just don't use the MapDrive client. Well, fine, turn it off. You've just removed that as an interface, and from a security standpoint, a threat vector or an attack target, all the way down just through settings and things like that. So let's move on from settings. Enterprise is essentially settings with a couple special categories of settings. We've talked a few times about SSO, and Dan mentioned that there are built-in configurations for a number of different providers, Okta, One Login, and such. So in a lot of these cases, like Azure, when you're setting up your SSO in Azure, if you search the directory in Azure for providers, we come up. And of course, I know they're renaming AzureAD to Entra, so we'll update all of those things too. But it's going to be a few months till that comes along. So you actually can get pre-configuration, and this too integrates with the integrations tab. So you can see there that we've got our information, and enabling AzureAD enables that guest user access that Rick mentioned. This integrates with a Graph API, an enterprise app that uses Graph API up in Azure. So there's some setup steps here. Of course, we have, again, a link telling you how to do that, and we're happy to help you with that as well. Sharing basically being the original methods we had with OneDrive and Outlook, integrating with the Microsoft APIs and the web client. Guest user access, building on that with those integrated accounts, and then of course public sharing them, where we've been talking about today, the new feature in 6.4. Data leak prevention, enabling it, some global things. Basically, in order to get the settings you saw over in shares, you have to have it turned on over here in enterprise. No other real changes to the enterprise tab. Device approval. Device approval is really neat. This gives you the ability to control, and it's not enabled on this server, so you'll see we don't have anybody approved and we don't have any checkboxes turned on over here, but gives you the ability to control those install clients, Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and whether users are allowed to connect. So you have the ability to essentially prevent people from downloading the client and installing it on a home machine. And if they do, they won't be able to sign in. They'll get a prompt that says they need to be approved. You can come in here, search for them by name or by device ID or whatever, and then choose to approve them or not. This only happens when they're turned on, right? So you have the ability to turn this on or off. Whether it's turned on or not, you still get this as a logging tool. So you still get all these events logged from different users as far as clients. We also have our traditional logging with all of the users' events that we have, which I'll hit in a second because I want to talk about one of the things that's not new, but it's newer. Public sharing. This is the three options for public sharing. The traditional OneDrive and Outlook, which were moved from settings, basically consolidated on this new public sharing tab, and then the new functionality in public sharing. And as I mentioned, you have all these controls around what do you want users to be able to do, and what do you want those limits to be. Do you want to require passwords? Do you want to allow them to allow downloads? Do you want to force them to have limits? That sort of thing. So you retain control. This isn't something where it can get out of control and people can just share the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And then down here in the bottom, you get a list of all the shares that users have made. So you can see Doug and Rick and a few other people have gone out and shared files and folders. You have the ability to edit these by revoking them. You can delete them. You can turn them on and off. You can do that sort of thing. You can also, right, deleting is, of course, the radio button, delete button. And you can also copy them. So if someone says, hey, I shared this file and I can't find it, can you help me? Again, we give the administrator the ability to help the users because they're going to ask you questions. I should mention, and Rick didn't, probably too many things to cover in the web client, the user has the same view of what they've shared and the list of things that they've shared under the gear icon in the web client, under the manage tab, under the manage element. So the users can self-resolve some of their problems as well. Probably the biggest one that comes up is links that expire. You'll notice that this link shows here even though it expired a week ago, and that's because we keep it here to give you the ability for a period of time. You control how long that is. It's up here under the deletes after days, so they can recover a link. So if Rick had shared this market definition document with someone and they didn't get to it, or they looked at it and now they need to come back to it 2 weeks later, Rick can just pop in here, edit the link, reset the expiration date. Or of course you could at the administrative level, but typically you'd make the user do it. Rick would go in here, reset it, re-grab that link, send it off to him. There is one new feature in clustering for anyone who's using clustering, and that is the ability to enable session and lock clustering with PostgreSQL. We previously just supported Microsoft. We've added Postgres in this iteration. This is neither clustering nor session and lock clustering is required, so I don't spend a bunch of time on that, but just know if you're using clustering and you're using the SQL option, PostgreSQL is now an option as well for users who might want to do that. No changes to alerting. This is that emailing system that sends you notifications about thresholding of events, like users who've downloaded a certain number of files in a certain number of minutes. Most people would be doing something like this with their SIM and using the syslog integration. This is also not new, but it's newer, and not a lot of people are using it just yet, but it's the ability basically to push all the user events over to a syslog server, or you can do your own thresholding. Notifications in team channels or Slack or SMS messaging, whatever things you want to do. Our traditional logging is all still here. All the events the user has done. You can see the things that Rick did today on this demo, logging into the MapDrive client, reading files on both the MapDrive and mobile, and all those things are in here. And of course, they're searchable. We saw Doug was in here a few days ago. If we search on Doug, we can see what Doug did. A little bit of mobile MapDrive kind of stuff over here. So got all these all this functionality in the logs, no changes to that. 2 more and I'm done. I know I'm running out of time. Health dashboard. This tool is not new. I don't believe in 6.4. I'm pretty sure this is in 6.3. Just a quick snapshot of the state of the environment your MyWorkDrive server is running in. This has historically been information that we've used in supporting customers who have problems, but we exposed it to you to make it something that you could proactively worry about services that might be up or down. You might have a flapping problem. You can get in and see the history, and this one, of course, is fine, so there's nothing really to show there. But you can look at history over time. If you've got clients reporting issues with performance or logins, you can look at utilization stats and, LDAP speed. Maybe you have long logins and you can see, well, something happened at this day and time when logins were really long. What was going on there? Oh yeah, I rebooted the domain controllers or something like that. So not a priority, not something you need to look at every day, but just a place to go in case something is not performing to spec. And we may ask you to look at that or may ask you to pull that up on a support call if we're on a webinar together, screen share together and say, hey, let's look at the help dashboard real quick. Just try to catch errors quick and easy. And integrations. This is new in 6.4. It's not new functionality. All this functionality previously existed. It's just a new interface to make it easier for you to see all the different connections you can make with SharePoint to third-party services like Cloudflare or online editing tools with SharePoint or OneDrive or OnlyOffice, along with an easy way to give you links to tools to help set those things up. And the ability, this is probably the big one that's in here, is the ability to stage changes or to see historical changes. So you might be using, and we are using OneDrive for editing. I'm sure I do that a couple times now. But if you're preparing to move to SharePoint Service Mode or you're preparing to move to OnlyOffice, you can add settings. So I can set this up and put my URL in here in this case and have that ready to go without enabling and disabling it. So you can pre-stage and you can also see historically what might have been in there. In this case, you can see we've actually got a setting for a local office server that we're not currently using because we have OneDrive enabled. So just a nice tool that people have had the need for over time. I don't want to say it's been often requested, but occasionally there'll be need to look at old settings. And you can see all of them in here, from the SSO providers to Duo and multi-factor search, syslog stuff. It's all here. So that's all in integrations. Dan, Rick, anything I missed? Anything you want to add? Otherwise, I'll pass.
I would just point out that the one thing that is new on this page is storage providers, and that was in order to prepare us for something we're going to talk about in a minute. We now support OneDrive and SharePoint, and we'll come back to that in a minute.
You're right. There is the idea of integrations is new, and there are 2 new tools on there. So great. Well, thank you.
We're laying some foundation there for our future.
Right.
All right. I will take back and share, and then we'll go through some slides and then get to Q&A.
Okay.
This is here, Rick.
Yeah, I'll take this. So what were the highlights that you saw? Again, for the people that are seeing it for the first time, just looks like it's always been there. But it is the OneDrive SharePoint integration, and also the public file folder sharing is new, and the integrations tab that we just did. So those are really the highlights. There's more, as Scott said, improvements to our MapDrive client, speed bumps, going faster, and different things. But those are the real highlights in 6.4.
Okay, I'll take this one. As I mentioned, we're kind of laying some groundwork in our integrations tab for some things that we're working on in our roadmap. We've heard from a lot of customers that they want to be able to eliminate Active Directory entirely, for a certain subset of our customers, and of course we'll support Active Directory indefinitely. But we are going to be able to allow customers to be able to use AzureAD authentication for the users natively rather than through a SAML provider. And so the MyWorkDrive server will not need to be domain joined in the future. You will just log into the server using a local account, and then you will make all your settings changes. And then AzureAD authentication will be what's used to determine what shares that the users are able to see using that natively. So, for example, a server that we would build, you could put it up in Azure. You can enable AzureAD authentication, point it to SMB storage, or Azure File Storage, or Azure Blob Storage. Those are also something that we're working on. We have a lot of customers that have struggled to use Azure Files because it does require Active Directory integration in order for Azure Files to understand permissioning. So as Scott pointed out, we can go ahead and give the permissioning from the MyWorkDrive perspective at the share level or the user and group level. It won't go down into individual files and folders, but what we found is that most customers are doing it at the share level or anyway, or they could even create new shares down to folder level. So that would be the Azure File Shares over API. We're also going to be supporting Azure Blob Storage over API. The first cut will be the same as Azure File Shares. All the permissioning will be handled by the MyWorkDrive server, and you looking up the users and groups that are in AzureAD. In the future, however, Azure Blob Storage does support hierarchical namespace, and it does have the ability to be able to put individual permissioning down at the file and folder level. And we hope to be able to integrate that like we've done in the past with NTFS permissioning with Active Directory. So that's something we'll probably look at after the first cut that we come out with in version 7 that we're working on now. Okay, I think we're ready for Q&A. I saw a whole bunch of stuff popping up there in chat,
which I have been frantically endeavoring to answer in the background. But I think it would be good to cover these in group. And I did not answer Sabir's question about basically getting started from scratch. So why don't I start with that one? Sabir's question, for those who aren't seeing the chat, is if you just have a standard traditional Windows Server environment and you want to get started with public folder sharing, what would I do or how would I do that? And the answer to that essentially is basically you'd need to install a MyWorkDrive server on a domain controller, or not on a domain controller, on a domain joined Windows server in the environment, and then configure the shares you want to use public sharing for in MyWorkDrive, and then that would basically be the foundation, right? Once you have those shares available to users and available for people to sign into, then they can make shares on those public shares from there. A number of customers who sort of start exploring public sharing have realized that guest user access is maybe a better alternative for them. So if you are starting from scratch, I'd consider both alternatives. Public sharing is good for sort of one-time, I need a short-term collaboration with, a single user on something who isn't going to have a sustained reoccurring need for that share, right? Rick's sending a quote out to someone, and they just need to download that quote once, or Rick's sending an agreement out for someone to sign, right? It's a one-time event. They're signed up. They're done. That's it. If you have a case where you're working with third parties on a regular basis, like a third-party marketing agency or a third-party accounting company or some auditors who are doing a 6-month audit or something of your organization, then you might want to use guest user access, because that lets you create a user account for them that they have a persistent ongoing connection to. They can sign in with their own credentials at any time to work on those files as if they were a member of the company. So I would definitely, at that highest level, consider which one is right for you as you think about getting into deployment. But the base question of where do I get started is you're going to have a MyWorkDrive server installed at the environment configured to connect to those shares. And I would definitely, and that's why I didn't write all this down, because it became too much to write in chat. But Rick or I would definitely be happy to have a call with you and talk to you specifically about your needs and what you want to do. Some of the other questions that come up in here. Bill asked about saving the log data that I showed, the user activities, like when Rick and Doug were signing in and doing things. Those log files are written to the file system, so they're text and XML files. You could definitely set the default retention for those is 30 days. You can adjust that within the server software. I didn't show it, but there is a setting in there, and some of those settings where I said, oh God, there's too many, I don't want to overwhelm you. The other thing that's very common for customers to do is to set up a script and copy those off to cold storage. So you could definitely preserve them. We have lots of customers who work in regulated, sensitive environments where auditing is required to be kept for a number of years, and we definitely support that. And Kevin asked about in the client the login options and whether you could restrict access to Remember Me and Map It Startup from the user, and you can't. Be honest about that. That control panel is just something that runs that you can get to. But what you can do, you can script the install with either an MSI or an executable. So as Rick mentioned, you can push that with group policy. You can also, if these are enrolled devices in some sort of MDM, you can do that with device management. You can push the client out. And when you do that, you can set specific parameters. So there are command switches to set a default login URL, set default rapid startup, set what log leveling it's using, all kinds of things like that. And so you can set those on install. You can also call them on run. So you could have a startup script that runs either as part of joining a domain, as a login, or part of logging in from a device management, or even just a logon script that's local native on the machine that runs and actually runs the MyWorkDrive client. So instead of using map at startup in my MyWorkDrive client, you just call it as part of the startup script, and then you can script anything you want. The user just gets drives at that point, or if it's AzureAD, potentially, or SSO, any SSO. I don't want to specifically pin it to AzureAD, but potentially gets an SSO sign-in box if they don't have an active session cookie there, but they don't ever get the MyWorkDrive login window. And I think that was everything I saw. Dan, I don't know if you had any other questions that came to you or Rick.
I just saw, based on a partner question, pricing for partners. That's prompted me because I've had that kind of question before. It's easy for me to figure out, but for people seeing it for the first time, you can buy by server, you can buy by number of users, blocks. So that's prompted me. I'm going to do a quick video and we'll put a link on that on the site to explain that a little more in depth so people understand. So I'll address that.
Yeah, and like I said to Justin, who raised that question, there's no changes to our licensing as part of this webinar. There's none of that has changed, so he should probably best reach out to you, and you can help him with open questions.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple that came up earlier, Joe had actually asked, and I answered him about OneDrive and SharePoint, and if they require drive letters. They don't. Well, they require drive letters in as much as the Windows client requires a drive letter, but they don't require drive letters on the server. They don't require you to push specific drive letters. They stack just fine using the traditional or the historic model of mapping everything on a single drive letter that's chosen at the client sign in. So if your users are signing in and they see that little box that says W drive or whatever drive letter they choose, OneDrive and SharePoint work fine with those, as well as as well as the Mac client and the mobile clients that don't use drive letters at all. So those drives, and they stack as well. So those of you familiar with our stacked share option, where if you make a mistake or a user is configured such that they get two different shares on S or two different shares on L or whatever, they work fine in that environment. So full support there. The other question I saw was if we were going to make this recording available later, and I've said yes, because we always do. So we'll have a recording available for everyone to grab.
We also wanted to point out this slide deck that we have, we can make that available as well. Just let Rick know. You can send an email to sales@MyWorkDrive. We've got, in addition to the slides that we've shown here, we've put together an extensive array of slides around some of the new features like external public sharing and some of the other features that we added with OneDrive and SharePoint as well. So we've got some extra slides in there if you'd like them or need them for a presentation.
We got a question in while we were talking from Morgan about how MyWorkDrive actually interfaces with OneDrive and SharePoint, and we're doing that. I'll give you a block diagram real quick. You may also want to refer to the documentation on our website, so I'll have Rick or Dan pull your email out of the participant logs, and I'll send you an email with this information too. But a block diagram of it is you're either using a hosted enterprise application, MyWorkDrive hosted enterprise application in Azure that connects to via Graph API to your OneDrive or SharePoint, or you're creating your own. But it is, at the end of the day, it's an enterprise application in Azure that the MyWorkDrive server is connecting to, which is connecting through Graph API to OneDrive and SharePoint. That's how that works. And it is new in 6.4. It does require 6.4 server and client. So if you're running older versions, 6.2, 6.3, you would definitely need to upgrade to 6.4 to enable the OneDrive SharePoint functionality.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we did OneDrive first, too, is that we had noticed a lot of customers, maybe they don't really care about the user's home drives. So maybe that they want to display side by side along with SMB shares that are kind of their crown jewels that they don't want to migrate, that they want to keep within the company. So that gives them kind of that mix of both.
Yeah, the other question that comes up around that, I know we're running out of time. We've got a boundary here, and I thank everyone for staying and sticking around for Q&A session. The impetus behind adding OneDrive and SharePoint was really for customers who have mixed hybrid environments. They've got some stuff on-prem. They've got those crown jewels Dan mentioned that they're not putting in OneDrive and SharePoint, but they've got user home directories that they're moving over to OneDrive because they don't want to manage that space locally anymore. And maybe they've got some things in SharePoint as they're starting to use SharePoint, and some of their teams and organizations using SharePoint. But at the management level now, I've got to deal with the OneDrive sync client. I've got to deal with people signing into web clients, and I've got to deal with the file count limitations in the sync client and that kind of thing. So using MyWorkDrive gives you the single pane of glass to be able to deploy one application that will connect to OneDrive, will connect to SharePoint, will connect to SMB. So if you're managing a fleet of laptops or mobile devices or people working from home with that sort of environment, you don't have to try to worry about, oh, well, wait, you don't have this installed, or, oh, wait, you don't have that installed, you don't have permission to this, you can't run that. Do it all through MyWorkDrive, one single interface. So that was our motivation in providing it, building those tools in, even though in a lot of cases they sound redundant with things that already exist.
Well, we're getting quick, guys. We're getting good at getting right into the... I'll wrap it up. Questions about MyWorkDrive? I am sales@myworkdrive.com. You can schedule a demo, a discussion, whatever you need. Find us on the web, MyWorkDrive. You can also download a trial from there as well. And our technical documentation is really stellar for any other kind of questions. So unless you guys have something to add, I think we're good to go.
No, great work. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you visiting us today.
Thanks, everyone.